I think where the two things where I feel Indian entrepreneurs still are maybe lagging is one, there is I think underpricing is a chronic issue. For some reason, maybe because so many of us grow up with middle class mentalities, I feel like too many Indian founders underprice, right? Could be software when they're selling to foreign markets. Like, we don't have that Apple mentality of like, hey, if I am creating value, if I am a great product, if I'm better, I don't have to be cheaper. And they leave a lot of money on the table.
Hello everyone, that is my guest Nitin Sharma. He's the general partner and co-founder of Antler India. Antler is a global early stage venture capital firm. So in this exciting episode he talks about his 15-year plus investing experience. He talks about how they help early stage founders, talks about the differences between American entrepreneurs and Indian entrepreneurs, talks about the number one mistake founders make after raising money, talks about Web3, Metaverse, Fintech and ONDC. He talks about the importance of mentorship, and finally he gives great startup advice based on Aristotle's persuasion triangle and much, much more. So please enjoy the show. Thank you. Hello Nitin, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Neil.
Awesome stuff. Please tell the listeners what you do.
Right now, I am the co-founder and general partner for Antler India.
Yep.
Antler itself is one of the world's fastest growing VC firms. So we are in 25 cities globally. I have set up the Antler Organization Fund in India along with my co-founder Rajiv. I'm also the global head for Web3. So I look at that globally. And previously have been a VC for most of the last 15 years of my career, working with early stage startups, initially in the US. And then in India at various stages. My journey has taken me from what I call the 10 to 100 phase of the company to the 1 to 10 and now almost minus 1 to 0. So I'm really working with founders at the concept stage in interesting spaces, really trying, especially with the focus of folks building in India for the world with a global mindset. And consider myself a fairly entrepreneurial investor because I've had a fairly non-conventional journey as far as VC investing goes.
Awesome stuff. And how's it going in India specifically?
Oh, it's great. I mean, most of your listeners already know it's a very exciting ecosystem. The last few years, it's taken a leap forward in terms of not just a number of startups, right? That's just a vanity metric, but quality of entrepreneurs, the experience of entrepreneurs, the types of ideas they're pursuing. I definitely sense a big change when I moved back to India after being abroad for 14 years. A lot of the ideas I felt were incremental or, copycat, X for India, right? Uber, Drop, Facebook, whatever you want to pick an example of. And I think that's not really the game today. I think a lot of folks in India are building with more original ideas, more localized. The digital penetration, the rate at which data is used, the digital economy is really the most exciting part of being in India right now, right? I know that the physical infrastructure and there are lots of other issues like in any emerging market, but where India has really, really just galloped ahead is really digital infrastructure, right? Which begins with connectivity, data, policies, and also, especially now, one of the most exciting things to come out of India in the last few years is all the fintech infra, starting with UPI and now, things I'm just really spending time around are new things like ONDC and OCEN. I'll definitely encourage your listeners to check it out. This is as exciting as Web3, for example, right? The stuff that's being conceptualized in India right now is world-changing potentially. So, lots of exciting things going on. We are working at the ground floor, the very, very first stage, the first 6 to 12 months of the founder's journey where we believe problems still exist. So, it's a fantastic experience every day to be part of this.
Can you share some stats about how many startups have you invested in?
So individually, I've done about 100 startup investments in my career. Most of that has been in India or startups. They may be domiciled abroad, but essentially they're a team building in India. This is over the last 9 years. As Antler, we launched last year. We've committed to 26 investments so far. These are pre-seed checks. We usually invest between $250,000 to $500,000 on ideas. Mm-hmm. So we do not require data product. We are trying to put the venture back in venture capital to take true venture risk on people and ideas. Much of this is, like I said, in areas like Web3, software as a service, developer tools, etc., where building in India for the world is really, really exciting. So We want to do about 80 investments in this fund in the next 2 years. And our goal is to deploy $150 million in India in the next 2 years.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, we will talk about your entrepreneurial life later. I just want to talk about the beginning of your career in VC, specifically the first year. What was that like? It must have been quite exciting.
Yeah, so it's actually fascinating because I started my VC career in the US.
Right.
So I was part of NEA, very an iconic fund, and this was a time when very few young people were actually entering ventures. So I had no clue. I think it was an inverted pyramid structure. You're one young guy supporting lots of partners. I'd never run a business at that point, or and so it's a really steep learning curve. And this was in 2008. So I meet so many folks in investing who started their careers in the last 5 to 7 years, and all they have seen is like up, up, and up. Folks like me started in 2008. For the first year, right after the global financial crisis, most of what I saw was actually companies making it through this struggle, right? Layoffs, down rounds. So that gave me a lot of humility and patience, and really a true understanding of those are the times when iconic companies are born, and those are the times when you see the true mettle of great founders. So it grounded me in reality, and that was sort of my first experience. Really, I would say not the euphoria that's existed in the last few years. Really steep learning curve. My first day, I remember my first meeting that I ever attended was a satellite company that we were funding. I had no idea about that space, no pun intended, right? So like any other VC career, I think when you start, it's just all fascinating, and then you realize that seems like a glamorous job from the outside, but it's really a service profession. You are in there to humbly serve great founders, and that's what you do. It's not, so anytime I meet sort of young VCs with egos, and I realize they haven't really understood what venture is about. And this is it's an apprenticeship business as well, right? The guilds in the medieval ages. So the only way you get better is actually shadowing great investors who've seen more, right? There is no template for how you become a good VC. There's no training program. There is no school. So, I consider myself very fortunate to have worked with some great people.
Cool. And can you remember what your first investment was?
Yeah, I was actually, I think it was a company called Nordic Wind Power. It was actually a wind turbine company. It was our first wind investment as NEA. And the technology, obviously, as the name suggests, had come from the Nordics, where wind power is obviously much bigger part of the overall energy pool. And so, yeah, it was interesting. I think it didn't work out as well, like a lot of clean tech companies. This was a time when Obama had come into office, and so there was a huge push around clean energy. And so I think we had some 25 companies across solar and wind. It's one of those things where, yes, a lot of them failed. A lot of them failed because, as many people might know, with China manufacturing solar, prices, just plummeted, and no one could compete with Chinese manufacturers. So a lot of the US startups and even Indian startups really struggled if they were on the manufacturing side. But that's kind of how I think about new technologies. You have to go through these phases when there's lots of failures, lots of things shutting down, but eventually some great companies came out of that portfolio as well, including a company called O-Power, which went public. So, it's just like what I now see with things like Web3 and, new spaces, climate in general. You've got to be really patient.
How do you deal with failure then? Obviously, a lot of startups do fail. Are you used to it now, or do you get emotionally attacked? Talk about that.
It's a great question. I have learned to be, one lesson is be passionate about your work, but not emotional. And there's a big difference between passion and emotion. And I think, you can't be emotionally attached to the outcomes. I know that's easier said than done. I root for every founder I work with. I myself am a founder right now. And so it's, this is not, this is personal. I get that. Right. But like you said, as you grow up in life, you see that great things take time, and failures are par for the course. And, you can't get too emotionally attached. You've got to keep going.
And you mentioned you started in 2008. There's a lot more VC companies now writing checks. It's a very competitive market, lots of competition. How do you deal with that? Because obviously your decision-making process is key to the success of the company, right?
Yeah, so I think I'll speak specifically about what we're doing right now as Antler and especially Antler India. So, Antlers is like I was mentioning, one of the fastest growing platforms, and what we are trying to do is to make a difference at that first stage.
Right.
And I don't think we don't think of ourselves in the deal flow game as much as in the company creation game, right? So, which is a different mindset. So we are not trying to just chase allocations in every deal, and nothing wrong with that. Some people are great at that, but what we find more interesting, both from a returns perspective and an impact perspective, is help people in that first 6 months when they're starting a company. What all could that mean? Well, first of all, a lot of people don't start companies or delay the starting of companies because they don't find the right co-founder. Now, that is a problem we are very focused on. We are helping create, we have a program called the Residency, in which we have had about 2,500 Indian founders apply. And we selected 73, and they're now going through the residency to match with each other and create new ventures. So they take the time, they get to know each other as people, they align on values and goals, and then start businesses together. For that, you need a machinery. So as much as we are a venture capital fund, we are actually not a typical fund. We are actually in the business of, being a platform where people can come and start companies. Co-founder matching is one need that we are trying to solve. The other need is validating ideas, right? So founders are taking these 3 months to sort of spend time with us, spend time with their customers, validate ideas before they start. And then in some cases, if the teams already exist, we are being their first believers before a single line of code has been written, just focusing on them as people, right? A lot more psychology than economics, and really focusing on, the unique insights they have, right? We've seen a lot of spaces and models and companies. So we've got the gray hair now to understand, and we've got a big team. So we don't operate this based on like my judgment or my biases or Rajiv's, right? We actually work as a unit. We've got a team of around 20 people. So we're one of the larger teams in India. And we work with founders in these spaces to be their first believer, whether they have a co-founder or not.
Are you looking for first-time founders then? Or are you looking for people who've, had 2 or 3 startups?
It's a great question. Yeah. It's a great question. One would assume that, given what I described, that it would be more of a need, or it'll appeal more to first-time founders. And actually, what we've seen is it's a real mix. We've actually seen a lot of second-time founders who want to go through the residency, for example, for 2 reasons. One, they realize that, it's an interesting thought. VCs talk about disruption all the time, right? Disrupt this and that. But the way that teams are formed has not changed over time. If you think about it, like, why is it? Yes, it's true that if you start a company with your buddy from high school or your colleague from Facebook, I agree that you will have the familiarity and trust and chemistry. I get that, right? And maybe in most cases, those will be the right combinations to start. But that doesn't have to be the case, because what is more important is that you align on values and visions and skills. Right? So if you, Neil, are going to start a company tomorrow in, I don't know, pick an area, right? Alternative protein, right? Maybe you should thoughtfully think about someone else who you may not have known or worked with, but if you can get to know them in a 3 to 6 month period and really see the complementarity, then maybe they're the best people. Then the two of you are the best people to start a company together, right? So we think that founders are coming back sometimes after their first journey to realize that, hey, let me thoughtfully think who I want to partner with. And the second thing is, sometimes they realize that they made some mistakes in the first journey, execution-wise, or went in too quickly before they had thought through their idea, or didn't have the right support infrastructure. So, that's another reason why they are quite happy to sort of, solve some of that with us.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing, I guess, is the global network. So the pitch for me or for us, for any founder, is, building in India for the world is a really exciting theme, right? Think about, in the 90s, India galloped ahead, leapfrogged because of IT services. In the 2000s, it was about mobile. Everything in India was about mobile. in the last decade, it was about things like UPI and payments and fintech, where India arguably has the best infrastructure in the world. What's it going to be this decade, right? It might be Web3. You see companies like Polygon, which is, if your listeners are less aware, one of the most important companies in the world of crypto and Web3 is actually a startup that was built by two people I know well who didn't come from many fancy colleges or fancy work environments. Like, they were two techies from Ahmedabad and Surat, I believe, and they today run one of the most important companies in the world, and a network that was worth $16 billion before at the peak in the last few months. So, there's going to be a lot of exciting innovation around these areas, and our offering is that when founders are building in these areas, you got to plug yourself into a global network on day one, because back in the day, the thinking was, oh, you build something in India for 3 to 5 years, then you try to go global, maybe with one customer in the UK or the US, right? That's the old school way of thinking about the world. If in today's world, you are going to build something for the global market, you need to think like that from day one, because the boundaries have disappeared. And you've got to hire a team accordingly. You have to have that DNA, right? You can't retrofit that 5 years later. And you've got to build a product correctly. So if your product is only built for an Indian user, you can't change it 3 years later, right? So I think a lot of founders, especially Gen Zs, right? Because what is happening is that Gen Zs are now becoming founders. And that a lot of them work with us. So they're kind of plugging into this global network on day one. And that's what we are trying to enable for every geography in Antler.
No, interesting stuff. Yeah, you mentioned the team. Who ultimately comes up with the decision to write the check then? And obviously there may be some disagreements along the way. Who gets final say, who's in charge, basically?
Yeah, I mean, it's as any fund would, we have an investment committee internally. Final decisions rest with me and my co-founder Rajiv. But it's really, we've not had major disagreements across the team, because we don't spray and pray. We take the time to it doesn't matter that it's a concept. We still want to take a little bit of time to get to know the founder, because we think it's a long relationship. And we also encourage some of the younger folks in the team to, we've got this thing called a wild card, which is inspired by Josh, who's the founder of Lux Capital in the US. Okay. I heard him on a podcast like this one, and it was an interesting thing where, the best decisions are usually made when one person is pounding the table and there is probably something that other people are not seeing, right? So you can't rely too much on consensus, and not everyone has to agree, right? Because then you'll miss something. You'll miss the non-obvious stuff. So we do encourage some of our younger members to take bets, and even if we don't fully buy into it, if they're really gung-ho, we want to support those decisions.
Good stuff. That's a good idea, that wild card. Let's talk about you then, your background. How did you start your entrepreneurship?
Well, in a way, I would. I had a conventional sort of upbringing in India, scholarships in Singapore and the US, and started on Wall Street. And like I said, after that, venture capital. I did one of the first edtech investments for our fund, NEA. And when we invested in this company, Everfi, it was literally a company being built out of a garage. And I decided to just join the founders as an early team member. So, I would not say that was my first, I would not say I was the entrepreneur there, but, I kind of said, well, let me just go from these cushy boardrooms to what it's like to build something. And I got my ass kicked because it is much easier to invest than to build something, right? But what that did, I mean, I did well over time. I made a difference to the company. But what it made me realize is I wanted to go earlier and earlier in stage over time. And I wanted to be closer to the founding experience. And I wanted to do this for founders with a lot of empathy. So that's kind of shaped my journey. After that, went to Wharton, came to India, was in Bombay for a few years as part of the founding team of a fund called Lightbox. So again, I would say entrepreneurial in the sense that it was, again, a concept, but I was, I was working with someone who was the managing partner. And then gradually decided to go out on my own and ran my own portfolio called First Principles. As part of that, became the first VC in India to go into Web3. So I have a bit of a knack for whether it's EdTech or D2C brands or Web3, going into these spaces maybe 2 or 3 years before they've taken off. And I like that. I'm okay being early. I don't like being late. So So that's what I did, and then I realized that a bigger need was actually to solve this as a platform, not just writing in angel checks.
Yeah.
And so that's why Rajiv, my co-founder, and I got together, and with Antler, and as we really got to know what Antler is building worldwide, we wanted to build sort of the India version of that in India, and so that's how this started.
Awesome stuff. What would you say is the biggest difference between American entrepreneurship and Indian entrepreneurship then?
Oh, great question. A few years ago, my answer would have been that American entrepreneurs are just better at communicating their stories, their plans, pitches, and just have more confidence and conviction. And that was one. And secondly, there are more interesting original ideas out there coming from the US, and a lot of Indian founders tend to, not think big enough. And I'm talking more to tech startups. I know that in the conventional Indian industry, you have obviously huge giant companies, right? So I'm talking about the specific tech universe, and that the services mentality is still there. But those were things I would have said 5, 7, 8 years ago. Today, I don't think that Indian entrepreneurs are honestly anywhere behind, falling behind American entrepreneurs when it comes to the quality of ideas or even originality in many cases, especially fintech, for example, or ambition, right? I think a lot of those things have gotten solved. I think where the two things where I feel Indian entrepreneurs still are maybe lagging is one, I think underpricing is a chronic issue. For some reason, maybe because so many of us grow up with middle class mentalities, I feel like too many Indian founders underprice, right? Could be software when they're selling to foreign markets. Like, we don't have that Apple mentality of like, hey, if I am creating value, if I am a great product, if I'm better, I don't have to be cheaper. And they leave a lot of money on the table. That is one. The second thing I think is I see founders do get emotionally attached. And one of the things that happens is in India, if something is not working out, you can keep dragging it, right? So there are a lot of zombie startups because it's not worked out. But in the US, what a founder would typically do is, all right, I gave it a try. It didn't work out. Let me do something better with my time. Let me go to Burning Man or whatever and recharge and do a new startup. So people are more pragmatic about shutting and moving on to the next thing. I think in India, you have a little bit of this, like, dragging it out. It's not so much the fear of failure. Maybe that's still a part of it. But it's the fact that you can survive like cockroaches, right? And you can just keep your burn low and survive for a long time. And by the way, that's a good thing also, right? Because it makes them more efficient. But it's a bad thing because sometimes it's just not a good business and you should shut it and be pragmatic and move on to something better with your life.
Interesting. That. What's been like the best day of your career then so far? If you had to, one specific moment in time, you thought, oh wow, it doesn't get better than this. Or any highlights?
I don't have such extremes anymore. I think maybe because I've become a bit more spiritual over the years. I think there are many sort of short-term spikes and many lows as well, right? So I mean, for me personally, I think the best is yet to come. But if I have to look all the way back, yeah, I mean, overcoming some of the challenges that I had in my college years financially and making it to a Wall Street job and making it to sort of one of the best Silicon Valley firms. Like for me personally, that was a sense of achievement back then. So I remember the day that I got into those places. But, I think, I don't have those sort of the best day kind of moments anymore.
Oh, okay. No, it's fine. You mentioned Web3 quite a few times now. So come on, give me the big pitch about Web3. How's this going to change the world then?
Well, if I tell you that we're building a new internet and a new financial system, I'm sure that most people will agree there's nothing, you can't think of things bigger than that. So this is as big as it might get. Now it will take time and it will have lots of ups and downs. But, generally that's the direction, right? Where the internet of today has tons of issues. We need a better internet. It may not have to be fully decentralized, but there are probably lots of places where we can build more community-owned models and decentralized platforms, and which are not monopolies. And we've seen the problems that some of those monopolies or duopolies can create. And so I am a believer that it will be it is what the internet was supposed to be when it started, and I think it should head in that direction. But today, it's nowhere there. The use cases are still not proven out. Crypto is still like a casino. It's still speculative, but people like me have the luxury of thinking about life in a sort of what's going to happen in the next 10-15 years. So I just think that India will play a big role in the infrastructure for this, and that's why we are, and I'm very excited about what we are doing, especially with that. 1/3 of our fund will go towards Web3 startups. So we hope to, and it's not about crypto tokens, etc. It's simply about like, okay, folks need to create the middleware, software, app data layers, infrastructure for this new internet and this new decentralized financial system. So that's going to take time, but hey, it could be built out of India now, and that did not happen in the 80s or 90s or the early 2000s. And so all of that value creation went to the US and China. But this could be one of the biggest shifts we see, is that the new internet could in large part be created out of India.
Thoughts on the metaverse? I don't know if you get any pictures about that. Have you invested? Do you have any thesis on it?
I think it's a term that's so people have so many interpretations of it, right? So for me, the true nature of the metaverse will probably come to life in another 5 to 7 years. Let's say 2028 or 2030, which is when you will have not just the fact that you have digital representations and avatars, which already are working fine for millions and young people and kids, but also the devices themselves, which will become truly immersive. You can buy an Oculus today for $200, but it will take some time before it's truly immersive with latency issues solved and the right kind of content being created. And that's if you see a world where people will spend a good 6, 7, 8 hours of the day in virtual environments, and you see they'll be immersed, and you see that there'll be these economies that get created, then yes, I absolutely believe it is inevitable. And whether it is education or travel or doing business, concerts and music, I mean, you can think of lots of use cases. And I do personally hope that that it doesn't happen too soon, because I think there are some real issues if people don't have the in-person interactions and all the experiences that make life worthwhile. But it's inevitable, and I think that there's a lot of fluff right now, but we are a few years away from sort of like I said, the immersiveness being truly solved for.
In terms of pitches, what are you seeing that right now? And obviously you mentioned Web3 pitches. Are you getting
lots of things? I think we're seeing quite a bit of activity around climate. That's a broad space, and really interest. Obviously things related to electric vehicles, but also ESG compliance, B2B, carbon trading. These kinds of ideas are interesting. Web3, a lot of ideas within that. So I won't go into the details. And then fintech, for us, what's really interesting is, payments and lending and all has been done in India. Like, you've had startups creating these things for the last decade. What's next? And one of the things that's interesting, there are a lot of things to do around insurance, but one of the things that we are personally most interested in is this new set of frameworks for digital public goods, like Open Network Digital Commerce, ONDC. I'll recommend everyone go check it out. It is fascinating. If that works, it's India's answer to essentially creating an Amazon without having any company. So, it's really saying, look, you take the entire stack of commerce, right? Logistics and payments and customer service and all. And what if you make any seller or any buyer connect with any other seller or buyer, right? So it's kind of the Web3 idea, but in an Indianized sense, a hugely ambitious vision. But we saw with UPI what happened and how quickly it became larger than American Express in the world, right? So I'm very intrigued by this thing, and that's one area we're diving in quite deep. But mental health is another area that we believe deserves a lot more investment. So yeah, it's we're really like looking at what large $100 billion companies, right, can be built out of India for the world. And these are some of those spaces we think it will happen in.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, in terms of pitches, you must get a lot of pitches. Any advice for our listeners on how to pitch?
I think people have become very good at pitching actually,
Good.
because back in the day you had to go to a fancy school or someone would mentor you, right? Today, like you can just take a course or watch a bunch of YouTube videos or listen to podcasts, and
Yep.
you can pick up a lot of stuff. So I think at the end of the day, there are good pitches and there are great pitches, right? So I think a lot of people have good pitches nowadays. There are very few bad pitches I see, but great pitches are really about, I kind of go back to the Aristotle triangle, if folks are familiar, right?
Mhm.
Any good way of presenting has to have three things, right? Like ethos, logos, pathos. Like, why are you the best person to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it something that it's what is it? What is your unique insight? A lot of founders, what I still find, they still don't go next level deep about why hasn't this been done already, right? Everything is you can find why haven't five other startups in the US or the UK or China succeeded in something, for example, or of course why haven't the earlier attempts in India succeeded? So unique insights, right? Okay, what is new? What is it why this time? Why you? I think people don't pay enough attention to that. And finally, the big picture as well, right? So I kind of think of it as like great pitches have a combination of a telescope and a microscope. You've got to be able to look far out in the future a little bit to really convince someone why would this be a big company, right? I think what people miss is that, and a lot of founders the only gap that exists is founders still don't fully understand the mathematics that venture capitalists have to deal with. Like a lot of founders don't realize, hey, you may have a good business, you should go build it regardless. And you may even find other sources of financing. But if you're going to go down the venture path, it will only make sense, especially for good firms, if they're able to see why this would be a massive company someday. Because that's just how the math works, right? And that's a longer conversation, which we won't have time for today. But if what I try to do in our sessions is make our founders understand the venture math. And there's a lot of material out there. So when you get that, you understand that if you want to go down the venture path, you've got to paint a picture for why this would be a large company. Large could mean 100 million in revenue someday, 50, I don't know, right? That depends on each space is different, but generally that big with a capital BIG is what people don't get enough, right? A lot of founders like, hey, I have a good business. Why aren't you funding me? Or I have a good idea. This can work. The problem is not whether it can work. The problem is, if it works, will it be big enough? That's all. That's all we care about, honestly, right? It is not, especially at our stage, I am not trying to cut my loss. I'm not trying to protect downside. I'm trying to maximize upside. And it's something that founders don't understand. You do not have to show us 5 ways in which you will be de-risked, because that's what a bank would worry about. But a venture firm, especially at the early stage, what we care about is this an idea that the only 2 things matter. Is this an idea that if it becomes big will be massive? And secondly, is this a founder who will walk through walls to make that happen? That's it. It's just that simple.
Last few questions. There's a lot of people now who want to be investors in terms of angel investing in VCs. Any advice, any tips, any do's or don'ts?
It really varies depending on your goals. I personally think a lot of people... So I think, yes, it's good to dabble. A lot of people have jobs and, are wanting to stay connected. And if they have the resources to write some small angel checks, that's a good idea. But never invest what you can. Like, it is actually, angel investing is kind of like the casino game. Like, do not put what you can't afford to lose, because most people don't realize that you got to ensure that you have access to the best founders, right? Because otherwise you're swimming in the wrong ocean, and it doesn't matter how many deals you make, you'll never get that large outcome. So I would not do angel investing just as a passive activity on the side and think that this will change my financial life, my future. Like, that likelihood is quite low. In those cases, obviously, people like us think that you should just park your money with professional investors who do this all day long and have access to the best deals. But if you are doing it as a hobby or for learning, then I think you should. I think the number one thing that I see working well is invest in areas that you can bring value to the founder, where you can bring some value to the founder, right? Because then not only will that founder succeed or will recommend you to others, but you will also enjoy this process more, because you should do this for areas that you know well, where you can add value, right? And then you'll also just have better judgment rather than just shooting in the dark.
Interesting stuff. And what qualities should entrepreneurs have?
It's sort of the same answer as, what makes a great founder, I think, is, obviously a lot of things, but fundamentally what I think, I kind of always go back to why you're doing this. Anything in life, right? Why are you doing this? And the why has to be very, very clear. And again, I'm not making the statement about, a small business in general, right? Where you may have different goals. But if you're talking about the venture path or technology startups, you just have to know that if you're signing up for this, you got to have the why be pretty clear, because you will go through very tough times. You will probably go close to death more than once, as your business might just, cycles might change, funding might dry up, a lot of things might happen. And the only thing that sustains you during those times is knowing why you're doing this, and your purpose and your passion be very strong. I know this sounds all fluffy and all, but it's true actually. If you enter a business without that next level passion, like somewhere you might just run into, and then you might just burn yourself out. And I think a lot of founders end up with issues around mental health and relationships and physical health issues, and then I just don't know if it's worth it. So I think having the why you're doing this is very clear. And then the best founders always have those that quality, that they just have some spike. You meet them and you start feeling this person is in the top 0.1% of people in the world at something, right? It might be their knowledge of something, it might be some skill they have, it might be the way they sell. So figure out your superpower and double down on that, and then find a team around you that solves for what you don't have. And then just the cliched thing, like keep going back to the customer. The number one mistake that I think founders make, especially after they raise a little bit of money, is they may have spent the first few months of their startup journey really spending time with customers, right? But then they get a check, and then they start to they just like employees to hire, and office space to find, and investors to talk to, and next thing you know, the founders lost touch with their customer. And it happens so commonly, I can't even tell you. And that's where things start going wrong.
Who's helped you on your journey? Have you had any mentorship? Anyone you want to give a big shout out to?
I think everyone that's been a boss for me is someone I hold up to as as a mentor. Folks at NEA in the US, folks I worked with at Lightbox in India. Now my colleagues at Antler and my co-founder Rajiv. I think I learn a lot from these folks, and I'm still figuring it out. I don't think that this is a long game. So, but actually, you make a good point, and it's something that I wish I realized sooner. I would do in their 20s itself, not figure this out in their 30s or 40s. Is cultivate mentors. This is a really underrated skill, and you've got to think about it. Not saying like formally, right? But you've got to be conscious about it, because it's not just like, oh, I used to work with this person, I used to get drinks, and that's fine. But after you leave, after you start your own company or do something, often people lose touch with those mentors. So you've got to be you should go to your mentors not when you need help, because then it's awkward. But you should just maintain a genuine friendship with your mentors throughout, and then you'll find out that they will help you see roadblocks before you see them, and you'll avoid making some expensive mistakes, and they actually will be quite invested in your success. We some of the younger folks end up thinking that someone X or Y is so busy, so I can't take too much of their time. But I think you realize that the more successful folks in life actually do really want to mentor, the up and comers.
Awesome stuff. Last question for people who want more information on Antler, or perhaps they want to pitch you. How do they connect? What's the best way to approach you?
Yeah, we're at Antler, antler.co/India. There's information on our activities and our team, etc. And I'm at Nitin, Nitin, at Antlerco, Nitin at antler.co.
Nitin, thank you for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks to Nitin for coming on the show today. And for more information, go to antler.co/India. Thank you for listening and supporting the podcast. And if you're building something exciting, please send me an email, hello@neilpatel.co, or tweet at Indian Startup SH. Or you can go to facebook.com/Indian Startup Show. I would love to connect. Thank you and goodbye.